It's now 5 o'clock, so I want to convene our session today. My name is Brian Burgoon, and I'm a colleague of our panelists today. I'm somebody who works very much in the middle of the same topic that we're going to hear about and discuss today. And I, in particular, work as somebody who comes from an American background, have worked at the University of Amsterdam for 25 years, exactly 25 years, as it turns out. The topic that we're going to talk about, of course, is therefore sort of obviously part of my interest. I will say at some point in the questions that I give to our participants, and also the way I interact with you, lead the discussion with you, in my moderating role today, I'll give you some of my opinions about this wonderful work. But let me just introduce it, starting with kind of a simple anecdote that I think is very much germane. So very recently, I finally watched the movie Oppenheimer. It's a film that won the Academy Award last year, so I suspect it's already, for people who watch a lot of movies, it's probably already faded from your memory. It's a movie that tells the story, of course, of J. Robert Oppenheimer, a very important physicist, the father of the atom bomb in the United States. And there's this funny scene in the movie where, in the early scenes in the movie, where this American guy has gone from the US to Cambridge, England, and then he goes from Cambridge, England to Germany, to Göttingen, as it turns out, and he goes from Göttingen to Leiden. And he's there about to give a lecture on physics theory, sort of basically nuclear physics, his area, in Leiden in the years 1927 or something like that. In fact, it's exactly 1927, I happen to know. And where he is he's at the Leiden lab group of a guy named Paul Ehrenfest. He was an important physicist in Leiden. And Oppenheimer then gives his lecture to a group of international scholars and researchers, and he does it in Dutch. Very weird Dutch, if you watch the movie, and no Dutch. So it's a very funny movie for those of us who live here. But it's an important moment in the story of this guy where you've got to realize how crucial the international character of the university is, not just to sort of the modern version of the university that we live and work in today, or that we witness around us in 2025, but it was really quite crucial to some of the most basic steps in scientific understanding, the most important steps forward and maybe also backward if you think of the ugly side of science, but certainly from the point of view of basic knowledge and understanding in medicine, and basic knowledge and understanding in the humanities and philosophy and the social sciences. You choose whatever important innovation matters to you. You should know from this example of Oppenheimer that it's that kind of story that gave us those innovations. The polio vaccine is as much to thank, has as much to thank to internationalization as does the atom bomb. What I like about this particular example is that Oppenheimer also captures the kinds of international university life that this book clarifies. The book, Universitas, Why Higher Education Must Be International, it sings a song to the value and meaning and importance of international education. And what it has to say is organized in with respect to the sort of, as Annette Freiberg-Hinan lays out in her introduction, the three sort of phases of international universities. So there's the physical mobility of the people who populate what happens in universities, people like me as a researcher and teacher, the students themselves, of course, the postdocs, and a lot of the support staff also for universities. These are international people. Secondly, the curricula, what we teach and what we learn, is internationalized, draws from different places in the world, and that enriches our understanding of every topic that we would study. And thirdly, the research that we conduct is conducted on an international scale. You can't know about the particle physics in 1927 without going from Fermi's lab to somewhere else in Rutherford's lab in England, and then to Göttingen, and so on and so on. And in this example from Oppenheimer, it's important to realize that some of that value really does involve the international teaching part of what we do. As I said, Oppenheimer was visiting Leiden to visit this guy, Ehrenfest's lab. What they don't explain is that this Ehrenfest guy was famous not so much because of his important science, but because he was known as being one of the best teachers of physics. So Albert Einstein said that the very best teacher of physics who he ever knew in his life was Ehrenfest, and that Ehrenfest's contributions as a teacher were as important or more important than his work as a scientist. And of course, he was an international teacher, right? He's teaching this American guy how to do things, and apparently teaching him a little bit of Dutch along the way. The book that they put together, therefore, looks at these phases of internationalization and does so in a way that reminds us how it is that the university and university life, higher education generally, has an international face or faces. It should be familiar to most people who've ever walked through a university, but it's very nicely organized that way. And of course, the topic with respect to all three of those phases of internationalization, we're talking about a very fraught period for the international university. So however much we may take seriously the sort of deep history of internationalization, like I'm describing it, most of you are sitting here because you probably know how embattled the mobility is in the international mobility is of universities, being able to hire and find housing and be welcoming to people from non-Dutch contexts, trying to find ways of encouraging and teaching and being meaningful in our core teaching missions to students from all over the world. And of course, doing what we can to facilitate genuinely international research. These three missions are all three under very serious attack. They're under attack in virtually all parts of the globe, but also here in the Netherlands and, dare I say, Amsterdam. So this is a reminder of the urgency of the work that this book has provided, and the vision that it gives us, I think, to international university life that we're going to talk about now. Now, what I want to do is clarify how we're going to do this, what we're going to do. And it really is going to start by getting initial interventions from both Annette. Annette and Maggie are going to give us their 2 cents. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. But what we're going to do is actually have them start by doing something which really captures the beauty of this particular book in general, which is that this is a book about those three phases of the international university, right? The mobility of its people, the internationality of its curriculum, and the internationality of research. But it does that not by sort of analyzing what's going on from the point of view of somebody who's researching everything that's going on with respect to those phases. It's instead drawing from the experiences of the contributors to this book. So both Maggie and Annette are manifestations of these three phases of the international university, as are the other contributors. So there's this really beautiful ethnographic quality to the work. So you're reading about the personal stories, the traveling that these people have done intellectually and physically in their academic lives. So it gives it's a really joy to sort of enter into the lives of these people, and it also allows them to draw on very significant insight from their own very personal experience on this big topic, this urgent topic. So indeed, that's how we're going to get started. Is I'm going to ask Annette and then Maggie to start by reflecting on what motivated them to do this particular work, their particular part of the collaborative work that they did. And each of them will get about 10-15 minutes to say your piece. And then afterwards, we'll sort of sit down and have a conversation where I want us to start talking about a kind of a second aspect of the work, or a second issue that I want you to reflect on, which is how the current context here in the Netherlands, and maybe particularly at the University of Amsterdam, is providing challenges, posing challenges to the international university as you see it. And that sort of allows us to sort of move into in a sense, the more controversial questions that we're wading into, and that we as a community thinking about higher education need to wrestle with. And that includes taking seriously the attacks on this idea of the international university. I've already put my cards on the table, made clear that I care about the international university. I'm sold by the basic sell of the book, but it's important for us to indeed take seriously these various criticisms and concerns about the international university. And so that's what I'm hoping we'll do in the second part of our discussion. And then upon doing that for about 20 minutes, half an hour, then we'll open it up to the audience, and I'll try to do my best to hear from the group what people here in the audience have to say about this topic, but in particular have questions for Annette and Maggie. Okay? So without further ado, let me introduce our two speakers. So the first is Annette Freiberg-Heenan, who's a professor of international relations theory at this university, at the University of Amsterdam, in the Department of Political Science. And Annette writes as somebody who her whole life has indeed been a person who's lived these sort of three phases of the international university. Most recently, Annette was the director of the Graduate School of Social Sciences, which oversees the master's programs for around 1,000 students every year. The largest chunk of students, in fact, at the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Science, and probably one of the biggest units in the university. And of course, that's very much an international student grouping. I suspect Annette will say a little bit about her experiences in that role, but it's a reminder that Annette is here sharing with us her expertise that drew on her own academic background, her PhD time in the US, her moving around as a German national to different parts of Europe and the world, and indeed the contribution she's made at this university for the last 15 years. And I should say also that Annette Freiberg-Heenan is the editor of the volume of Universitas, so we'll hear from her shortly. And then secondly, we have Maggie Leung, who is more recently part of the University of Amsterdam as a professor of international development studies, also in the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences. And her work is, as an academic, in a sense, more than Annette's, I think, really focused on the three missions of the university. So she looks at and experiences in her own life and has actually reported her ethnographic experiences as a higher educator who's moved around all over the world, different parts of the global south and the global north, and does so by focusing on migration and mobility and how that relates to issues of development, including economic development and social development. And it includes really a focus on the internationalization of universities, the experiences of particularly Chinese transnationalism in that internationalization. And in looking at internationalization of education, she's really interested in questions like, what is the future of a place like the Netherlands, a place that's experiencing very substantial graying of its population, if it doesn't pursue a very open international university, which becomes a really important vehicle to, in a sense, channel migration in ways that are good for development and good for sort of human flourishing. So we're going to hear from Maggie as well in her particular contributions. The question to you both remains, however, what was your motivation to do this work? And then you have the floor to say whatever else you want to tell us. So thank you very much. Annette, take the microphone.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you all for being here. I'm sorry that Gary Nijenhuis, our fourth speaker, can't be with us today because she fell ill. The upside is that hopefully this means there's more time for your comments and questions later and to turn this into a conversation with the audience. I look forward to that. So this is the book, Universitas, Why Higher Education Must Be International, and it makes the case of its title. I want to start by telling you, as Brian has also asked me to, why I started this project. The bottom line is that I realized at some time that I could not take it for granted that the people around me all supported internationalization, and if they did so, that they did that for the right reasons. And this came, I have to say, rather unexpected for me. My own career, as you've heard, has been international since I first went from Germany to the United States as a student when I was 21. And it's been international ever since, and it's taken me, besides to the US, to Romania, to Slovenia, and to the Netherlands, where I've now worked for almost 22 years. For me, it's self-evident that the fact that I have had such an international trajectory has made me a better scholar, a better teacher, and a better university administrator. I also believe that I've been able to contribute something positive in the places where I went. And I was, for the most part at least, also being made welcome in those places and felt appreciated. So that had the effect that I came to live, I suppose, in a sort of happy bubble where it was clear that international higher education was a good thing and every sensible person agreed. But over time, after working at the UvA for a while, I picked up some contrary signals, some disturbances of my bubble, as it were. And the first that I consciously remember was when a former dean of my faculty said that he didn't understand what the possible value added could be of teaching psychology to an international classroom, as opposed to an all-Dutch classroom that was. And I couldn't quite believe my ears at the time. I thought, what an odd thing to not understand. But I was able to put this aside at the time because his was a minority voice. And the political climate at the time was still supportive of internationalization, and so was the university itself. So I tried to forget I ever heard that. But later, when I was serving as director of the Graduate School of Social Sciences, I started picking up more signals that while internationalization was still supported, it could be supported for the wrong reasons, which also made the process go wrong in important ways. To say this as concisely as I can, if the idea behind bringing in international students is just to up the numbers, to bring in more students to gain more income, then you are undervaluing those people and you're undervaluing what they bring. And you will be spending insufficient resources to support those people properly and to support properly the entire endeavor of international education, which of course includes also the local students and staff. In short, when you internationalize, you should do it for the right reasons and you should do it right. And that was when I decided to produce this book. And from the beginning, I wanted to take this autoethnographic approach because I felt that I knew what I knew because I had lived it. And I'd met others along the way who have also lived international trajectories in higher education. Together we can span the globe and we can tell a universal story. So the idea behind the book was for people from around the world to tell their stories of international mobility in higher education, from school to student life, to the lives of settled academics and university administrators. I think they're trying to silence the dog out there.
There's a little accident.
Is it very disturbing?
Yes.
It is for me, I have to say. So wait one moment, it's in progress. I don't know whether something happened, I think.
I think it's an accident.
Is everything okay out there? Okay, I will go on. Where was I? So, yes, all authors in this book, therefore, have rather a lot of experience. and that informs their analysis. And the analysis then both explains why higher education must be international, but also examines what does not go so well with internationalization processes, how they might need to be rethought in some ways, and how they can be improved. And I think that Maggie's going to speak a little bit more about this. While we were working on the book, then the pandemic happened and things got delayed, and then the tide turned in this country. And what started out as a bit of a hobby project suddenly seemed to be a timely and important intervention in public debate. Well, I would like to see it that way, but I'm quite pessimistic that we can sway anyone, I have to say. I think we'll get to that in the discussion. But what concerns me is, for example, that we were unable to get anyone to join this discussion here today who would contradict us here on stage. We worked rather hard to get some relevant political decision makers to join us here, and ideally people who would contradict our message. We heard back from people on our side that they would have liked to come but couldn't, no time. And from people with whom we could have had a fierce debate up here, we didn't even get responses. And this is why it seems to me that nothing is more important for a functioning democracy than to be able to discuss with people who hold different views. And now, that is what one could have learned in an international classroom. And this brings me to the core argument of our book, which I will lay out in 6 points. To start with, internationalization is a process. It has an ation at the end. It's not a state that we want to achieve, but it's a process of opening up to the world and interacting with difference for the sake of gaining knowledge and insight. As such, it's a defining feature of education itself, which is also a process. Second, internationalization takes different forms. The most obvious one, maybe, is mobility, right? Students, teachers, researchers moving around the world. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody has to do that. But when it's done, something happens. Students and faculty going abroad have very impactful experiences. They learn about a foreign country, culture, language. They make friends from other countries. They learn to adapt, to integrate a little bit, to thrive in a different environment that maybe is a difficult environment as well. And that's an inimitable process of growth. But they also help those people grow with whom they come in contact when they go abroad. And here we get to the third point, which is the international classroom. People from other places bring a diversity of experiences and views into our classrooms that will vastly enrich the learning experiences of everyone there. And this is in some fields pretty obvious. I think international development studies should be pretty obvious. In international relations, my own field, it's also fairly obvious. If I want to understand conflict in the Middle East, that will be facilitated by having people there from Iran, Israel, the US, Russia, you name it. But it's also true in fields like psychology, Pace, my former dean, where through having diverse cultures present in the classroom, you can learn to look at, for example, cognition or emotions in ways that you could not have come up with by yourselves. And even in mathematics, I recently attended an open day of the Bachelor of Mathematics at the VU University. It's taught in English, if you didn't know that. And someone in the audience asked about that. Is it going to stay that way, given that, there's going to be this test coming and the government doesn't want that anymore? And the colleagues that were given the open day were colleagues teaching there at the Bachelor of Mathematics. They answered, I was rather astonished by that. They said, "We will not go back to teaching in Dutch. All our books are in English, and we are an international research community. We don't want to go back." Even I was surprised by that. But then I thought, shouldn't they know best? Aren't they the ones doing the work? So I went home thinking. Fourth, another aspect of mobility that contributes to the quality of education is motivation. The motivation of students, or indeed staff, who go abroad. It's a conscious choice to go somewhere else to study in a foreign country. And it's not easy. You have to invest in that, and you have to expect. There may be friction, it may be difficult. You have to really want that. And that means that students who come here have to be extra motivated. This gives a boost to the quality of our study programs, and that benefits also the local students. And the Dutch students who go abroad do the same in the places where they go. To go back to the previous point, in all fields, you learn more and you learn better by bringing in different perspectives, which come with different backgrounds. And in the process, you also learn to deal with the existence of different perspectives, which is vital to learning to get along with other people who are different from you. This is one of the basic ingredients of being able to live in an open and democratic society. And that is my fifth point. It's no coincidence that open and democratic society is under pressure, while internationalization of higher education is experiencing a pushback. They belong together. The enemies of the open society are the enemies of internationalization, and vice versa. This point can be seen better by looking at history, which Brian's already done a little bit. When the universities were first founded in the Middle Ages, the Westphalian system of nation-states did not exist yet. And it was self-evident that, for example, as an aspiring theologian from Friesland, you had to go to Prague, Vienna, or Heidelberg to study. And there was a lingua franca to make that possible. This situation of borderless education only became abnormalized when nation-states became paradigmatic, and they repurposed universities as production sites for their own national elites. After the Second World War, the UN were founded, and the international idea received another boost. And now, one might think, we've entered an era in which this is being reversed again in many places. This, to me, fits into a broader context of decline in the willingness to cooperate with other countries in international politics, and a return to strong nation-states and competition among them. But when people cooperate less, whether this is in an international organization or a university seminar room, when they cooperate less, they understand each other less. And then they are much more inclined to interpret the behavior of others as weird or even hostile. Ultimately, this increases the risk of conflict. The threat to internationalization at universities can therefore be seen as part of this broader process away from an ethic of cooperation. The last form in which internationalization is essential to higher education is the open-minded quest for knowledge and insight. The essence of research, the essence of science, indeed, and Brian has talked about this. Why on earth would we expect that we can learn everything there is to learn about anything, really, within the borders of our own country? My sixth point is that questing beyond one's parochial is not just essential for personal growth and for improved learning, but also for better access to scientific discovery and progress. Take large language model development. OpenAI thought they had it nailed with ChatGPT for the US. Turns out a couple of guys in China did it better and came out with DeepSeek. All over the world, people are constantly thinking, experimenting, building stuff, writing. And to optimize science, you have to find them and connect them. Dutch universities have excellent international standing today because they have in the past hired the best and brightest researchers from all over the world. Turning back internationalization now will mean that they will leave again in droves. And nobody who has the interest of this country at heart could possibly want that. Thank you.
So you can still see me. That's rare. Oftentimes I get hidden completely behind this kind of infrastructure. Speaking about inclusive international environment. That's great that you guys can see me. Yeah, what motivated me to write a chapter? I have to thank Annette, of course, for the very friendly invitation. I got an email, a very friendly email from Annette in my very new UFA email box about 3.5 years ago when I first got the job here. And I thought, wow, so friendly people in UFA. And I was very happy. Anyway, I was happy to start my job here. But I have to say your email really made my day and made the transition of, after 11 years working in the Utrecht University to come over, seem easier. So in the email, Annette said that she's putting a book together, and it was a very interesting approach. Indeed, like Brian was saying, that we have to write this in an autobiographical way. For me, it was a challenge. How do I write these things? I mean, my story, yes, I have a story, but how do I lane that? Because I also didn't want to just write my story. I wanted to also do a little bit conceptual about internationalization, which is indeed has been so much of my life in different ways. And then another thing that Annette, you said that was that it's a slow science project. And I was like, wow, that's also very liberating, a low science book. So I have to thank you for the opportunity. And then I quickly said, yes, I'll do it. And then the next question, what am I going to write about? So internationalization does not happen without mobilities, as we already heard, mobilities of people. But I have been, in my research, also done a lot to think about mobilities of non-humans in the field. So I actually approach internationalization more thinking about international study, not as a discipline, but how study, the field is internationalized. So we are talking also about mobilities of curricula, before maybe books and papers, ideas, ideologies, learning practices, also money, a lot of money in the field, and so on. A lot of things move. So I was saying, okay, I've done quite a bit of thinking about mobilities. I'm a migration and mobility scholar, so I've done a lot of work, not only about people who move, but also about what does that mean when people move for different reasons. So I start with this mobility as the core theme, and I drafted a chapter, which took a while. It was slow science, so I really took the liberty to take it slowly, and eventually even Annette was like, Maggie, where's your chapter? I'm like, oh, yes, I'll write it now. So actually at the end, it became a little bit of a fast food thing, but I'm proud of it. And finally, my chapter is entitled, What Mobility? What Internationalization? Decentering for Pluriversal Higher Education. So with the chapter, I have to say, I also took the liberty, because Annette, as always, also for today, she always say, Maggie, do whatever you want. In the chapter, write whatever you want. So I also took the liberty to write what I wanted, and I think the chapter may became a little bit of a surprise at the end because I really want to, I didn't want to write a chapter to sell internationalization, but I actually want to unpack internationalization. I want to actually think more critically, what has internationalization been performed or practiced, and what moves, if I take this mobility perspective. So what moves and what doesn't move? What has been made to move? And then, so what? So this is what I want to do. And with the chapter, I make the plea for thinking about mobilities, in plural, in higher education from a broader and relational perspective. And I do so by narrating and reflecting indeed on my own mobility biography and experiences in internationalization. Both as a student, I left Hong Kong, my home, when I was 17, so many years now. And I've moved, as a student, as an academic staff, in and out of Hong Kong, in and out of the US, in and out of Europe, and so on. These changing positionalities have shaped my way of thinking about and dealing with knowledge, the idea of internationalization, diversities, and academic work more broadly, and even more broadly about social engagements. Through my history, I argue for decentering our thinking and practices related to the generally elitist and hierarchized field of higher education. I propose that we stretch our optic, our lens, and here, as a geographer, I always say spatially and temporally. We have to stretch our optic when it comes to analyzing the who, the what, why, how, and so what of mobilities in internationalization. So as instructed by Annette, I started the chapter with my own story. It is a very interesting story, I think, but I won't get into that here. Otherwise, I would derail and then it gets complicated. But please get a copy of the book and read it. That's the whole point of a book launch as well. Not the whole, but one of the points. And there's the Q&A session. So if you really want to hear my story, you can ask a question then. But I still think that it deserves a little bit of mentioning, that it is perhaps because of my still unusual, working class family background as an academic, an international academic, that I have always held a critical stance towards dominant views and interpretations. I'm drawn to looking for what is missing in the unquestioned narratives and unpack taken for granted categories. Academic mobility is often seen as a phenomenon for the privileged. As a result, mobility experiences of those who do not fit this generally elitist narrative have not received much attention. Over the past, also 25, the magic number, over the past 25 already years, I have tried to fill some of the gaps through my work as a PhD, as a young researcher, and now a little bit older. Beyond focusing on the people, as I said before, outside of these standard narratives, I also pay attention to other elements that move in the broader system of higher education. So some key questions that I think we should ask critically include what moves in our internationalized education fields, what kind of knowledge, practices, standards, and values are circulated, are produced and reproduced, what are silenced, and what even get erased. And in which direction do these tangible and intangible elements move? What are the impact of these uneven mobilities? In particular, how have these flows contributed to intercultural encounters and exchanges, which are identified as important goals of internationalization? In the chapter, I draw on and engage with the vibrant and profound discussions surrounding global international education and a lot about decolonizing and decentering academia. In particular, I find Nlofu Gasheni's call to unpack decolonizing. He said we unpack it to deracialize, to de-hierarchize, to decorporatize, and to de-patriarchy, to de-patriarchize, I don't know what is the word, of knowledge and education. I found his work very inspiring. He calls for a fundamental transformation of the Eurocentric knowledge system through the reconstruction of university into pluriversity. Hence, the title of my chapter also, A Plea for Pluriversal Higher Education. So this requires the practice of something called globalectics. It's a term coined by Watongo that denote, I quote, an ethics of reading that assumes the interconnectedness of time and space in the area of human thought and action. This globalectic approach reads every center as a center of the world, and each text as its mirror. So there's no one center. We have every center is a center. When applied to the field of internationalized education, it denotes a pluriversal system in which different voices from multiple ecologies of knowledges coexist and are linked through intercultural translation that pursues a mosaic of convivial epistemology. Nlofo Gashini concludes in his work that the internationalization of higher education cannot be a technical and procedural process. It's not about how many people move. It has to be liberatory and rehumanizing project, engaging with colonialism and dislocating it. Such a decolonial model necessitates and nurtures multiple directionalities in the flows of knowledges, values, standards, and practices. Co-learning and co-creation of knowledges take on a more open, diverse, responsible, fair, and inclusive forms and pathways. So I go on in my chapter and towards the end section, the final section of the chapter, I present a few examples of my experiments in making education spaces more international, as I consider international, decentered, more pluriversal, more conversational, and more co-creative. Since this is a chapter that I should go more autobiographically, and I take it like this, that I use the time to reflect a little bit what I've done, and as an educator, as a researcher. And I do so through a mobility perspective, and this is where I'm saying that I also want to do something conceptual in thinking about education spaces as spaces of flows, where different mobility flows intersect, and what happened then. How much time do I still have? About 5 minutes?
Take your time.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. I shouldn't go too much, but I want to say that if I have to pick one geographer, I'm a geographer. You might have heard it already. I'm a very passionate geographer that I propagate. One who influenced me a lot would be Doreen Massey. And she, according to her and her conceptualization of places, is for me very fundamental. So according to her, places, so it's also about like a country or a classroom or this room here, should be thought of as, quote, articulated moments of networks of social relations and understandings, but where a large proportion of those relations, experiences, and understandings are constructed on a far larger scale than what we happen to define for that moment as the place itself. So do you get it? So what is happening here in this room, it might seem to be confined. Oh, it's the Netherlands, it's a country, it's on campus, it's in Amsterdam. But places are not like that. We cannot think of places as inward-looking. Places constituted because of the flows that go way further away. So this is, for me, very important, always to think of particular place and space is constituted by flows of a lot of things, of people, but also values of materials, money, etc. And Doreen Massey also underlines the importance of politics. So politics of mobility is essential. She argues that mobility and control over mobility both reflects and reinforces power. Yeah, so that is also important. We know that, okay, a lot of flows make up this space, but there's a lot of power, it's hierarchy. So if we have to be critical, we have to look at those as well. I said that, in the end of the chapter, I give a few examples to show you how, with this mobility as a concept, with how I see spaces, how I want to be critical, I want to question, the unquestioned. How do I work as an academic? First and most obviously, in my own field, international development studies, we as staff, students, we often move so that we understand, we learn about what's outside of our immediate comfort zone, maybe you can say. Also migration studies. I'm a migration scholar, so it is intrinsic that I move around and I do research somewhere else. We do excursions with our students as geographers. So all this is part of my life, very important components. But as we do all these, to travel, to go for adventure, right? If we still use this term, Courtney, that we send students out to places. I remind myself, and I also my colleagues, and try to coach our students to be reflexive and responsible as we do these trips, to go on this journey. Harry cannot be here today, but she's a very dear colleague of mine from Utrecht, and I know that she wrote in her chapter also advocating this, that we must be mindful of the power relations and the flows of cost and benefits through our encounters and because of our encounters with our international partners. And here I draw a lot also on the productive discussions in our field, ideas that chart pathways towards less extractive, more equal, fair, and regenerative practices. The second thing that I do a lot is to disrupt social categories and hierarchies in academy. With a globalistic perspective, we learn to appreciate how knowledge is multiple and open. So, how to flip. Maybe a lot of you know then how to flip classrooms, how to see classroom not as like what I do now, like sending information. We want to have it as more interactive when appropriate, of course, not always. But what I love doing is indeed to get students who are oftentimes very resourceful. They have also seen a lot, done a lot. But what I also do is I very often bring guests to my classrooms, and often they are international guests. They may be migrant laborers, they may be diaspora organization members, they may be human rights defenders, filmmakers, poets, dancers, but how to have them in our classroom so that they are not seen as object of study. They should not be seen as raw materials used to illustrate something bigger, something more profound. Rather, we must learn to unlearn assumptions and hierarchies of knowledge that we have for too long been trapped in. I think internationalization is not only about moving students, academics, researchers around the globe to learn from other university scholars, find data, create knowledge from them. It is also about valuing different kinds of knowledges and people who have traveled, perhaps for non-academic reasons, and have valuable insights to share with us, to teach us in our quest for intercultural encounters and exchanges. So I know that I could take all the time I want, but I will come to the last point I want to make. Turning our classroom into forums of diversities requires translation. And here I refer to a reflexive process beyond the technical act of translating between languages, which is certainly important in internationalization. It is, of course, an important part of what language do we speak. But translation is also about recognizing, understanding, and perhaps reconciling differences in the meanings of concepts that we grapple with in our work. So in international development studies, our field, we engage with important notions, like fundamental notions, right, such as poverty, a good life, hunger, freedom, peace, solidarity, reciprocity. We might work with some definitions or indicators that are totally logical to us, but they might not have relevance to our partners. So in her book, by a very dear friend of mine, Richard Nagar, in her book, Hungry Translation, She pushes us to think more critically about the framings that structure our research and activism practices. Rita advocates an alternative thinking about and performance of translation. And I will quote her here. Translating is to reimagine, her plea is to reimagine translation as a dynamic, multi-directional process of ethical and politically aware mediation among otherwise impermeable local diversities. A process that always hungers for new political possibilities that we may never have imagined before. So only through translation we can connect the many, many centers that we talk about, the pluriversality, the local diversities. Propagating for local diversity doesn't mean that we stop talking to each other and, oh, you do your diversity, I do my diversity, right? It is about communicating and translating and solidarity. So we must mobilize ourselves, physically or not, to learn from each other and build relationships, to mobilize knowledges and values in and out of the classroom and in and out of our research and work contexts. We need to constantly pay attention to and be reflexive about the similarities and differences and the relative positions amongst us. Through such caring, I call trans-border traveling, we chart respectful, meaningful, just and regenerative ways to understand one another, to acknowledge each other's labor, and to imagine and co-create new shared futures. That's all for that.
I don't know if I can be heard. Can I be heard on the microphone? Yes, it's working. So thank you both. Thanks, Maggie, and thanks, Annette, for getting us started. As I said, as I warned you, I want us to move from this issue of, or this way of looking at the work from the point of view of what motivated you. I want to move slowly but surely to taking seriously the specific challenges. But before I do that, I want to actually ask both of you if there's something else you want to say about what I see as one of the difficult challenges of the story that you tell when I put the different pieces together of the different sort of ways of thinking about internationalization and thinking about the three components of internationalization. Actually, in Annette's, in your introduction, you said a lot more than what you said in the book, in a way. But I want to ask you if what happens in the actual mobility, the moving of people, is really so linked to or dependent upon what we do in the curricula to internationalize a curriculum, and whether those two things are so important to and are affected by the internationalization of research. Are these sort of islands of internationalization that we can see as really separate, or do you see them as things that really have to move together, work together to make a difference for the university, either in the terms that Maggie was mentioning, the depatriarchyizing, the de-hierarchyizing, and the pluri-university making of internationalization? Are those goals that you pursue by really doing all three of the things, or is there kind of a priority list in the way you think about these issues? So I'm going to look at you, especially Annette, first, since you're the one who has the overview of the entire project.
Well, I'm also curious what you think about that, but for me, those are dimensions of internationalization. They can be connected, but they don't have to be connected. So, for example, you could have mobility internationalization with students moving around the world in great numbers without having curricular internationalization. So you could go to Japan and then learn everything only from a Japanese perspective, and then spend a semester in South Africa and learn everything only from a South African perspective. That's conceivable. What's happening at our universities is indeed all these types of internationalization that I've mentioned have been have progressed up until recently, including curricular internationalization. And that was, to a large extent, at least in this context, pushed by international mobility, in the sense of people coming from other places and feeling the need to bring in their own context into the conversation. We had students complain, well, the examples are all from the Netherlands. I also have interesting examples from Colombia or wherever it is I come from. So in this context, we could see how international mobility pushes curricular internationalization, but they're not necessarily logically connected.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think these are different dimensions of international study or our education field. And I agree, I don't want to add more. I only want to add one more point is that we need to also stay together. Because I think when we start separating these, that is about student, that is about research, we also run the risk of fighting our own battles, especially at times like this, right? So it's classic, right? And people want to attack, then they attack this part, and it's like, oh, I'll give you back this. A little bit like this lay student study fees of students, right? It was like, oh yeah, they take that back. So battle is over. No, we have to see, okay, even though I'm not a student, it is part of the struggle. It's a part of the attack against internationalization. Therefore, all these dimensions should also stay together for political reasons. Otherwise, I agree with you, right? The practice of which they can be separated. But I think, yeah, at times we need to make sure that, we don't separate ourselves too much. I think that's, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to shift. So that my asking you that question was partly a trick question, because if I am going to play devil's advocate and think, what does the sort of nationalist, maybe a bit xenophobic, but in any event, nationalist sort of take on higher education reform say about Universitas, why higher education must be international? They would look at a lot of these ideas and say that they recognize the importance of internationalization. They might say that. I don't want to overdo my devil's advocacy to make it as fully sympathetic as I would be able to. But the point is, I could imagine them saying that they recognize the importance of international visits, international work, and openness to ideas in the curriculum. Right? We should be reading things from wherever those ideas are written about in a useful way. And for that matter, in languages that we think are important, whether it's English or Latin or Dutch or whatever else. By the same token, researchers should be not just free, but should be encouraged and should be facilitated to do their work in whatever places are germane to their object of study. So they would not have a real problem with the two of the three dimensions that you talk about. The one that is under attack is particularly the idea that in order to get anything done that's truly international, you need to have the students coming from all over the world and students being able to go all over the world, and or that you have faculty members and researchers and teachers coming from all over the world. The mobility face or dimension of internationalization is the one that they're worried about. And their reasons for saying that have a lot to do with the logistics of this. At least they claim that their reasons for doing it involve these logistical issues, like, oh yeah, we need to make sure that we service Dutch society by making sure that we have enough Dutch language courses and curricula and research to train the leaders of tomorrow for the Netherlands, which is still Dutch language. Or as they say, logistically, it's more expensive to invite and train and house international students compared to Dutch students. These are the kinds of arguments that they make. So what I want you to do is respond to this idea that the critique of the internationalized university might not be so threatening if we find little workarounds to deal with this particular issue of mobility, and if we try to push back in the right ways to make sure that an internationalized curriculum and an internationalized research environment are alive and well. So put yourselves in the shoes of talking to me as the devil's advocate and telling me why I'm wrong to think that the mobility stuff is the issue and the other issues, the other dimensions are not such a problem.
Should I start again?
Please.
Well, there's a lot to say, but let me start by saying that I don't agree with the premise, because I don't think that the mobility dimension of internationalization is under the greatest threat from nationalists. I think that curricular internationalization is under the biggest pressure from nationalists because of their not wanting certain ideas or ways of looking at the world to be taught to the students. When we look around the world at places where internationalization in whatever form has come under pressure from right-wing nationalist governments, we see that curricular internationalization is the first to go, as, for example, courses and entire study programs in gender and sexuality studies are shut down. That's about content. That's about shutting down content diversity of ideas. The argument that international students can cost money and under certain specific circumstances don't cover their costs but have to be paid for by the local taxpayer and maybe use up housing that could otherwise be used by locals. That's not a nationalist argument. That argument can be made by anyone. It's a money-based argument. Now those can be combined, and I think particularly in Dutch discourse we've seen how they are combined to sinister effect, to form coalitions that include nationalist forces but also right-wing liberal forces that can unite behind an agenda that pushes back internationalization precisely because those arguments are mixed. But there's nothing specifically nationalistic about being against mobility internationalization. In fact, as a nationalist, I would welcome people from other countries to my universities, as long as they're not spies, if they pay and they learn what I want them to learn, and they learn about how great my country is. If we think of how internationalization started in the United States, teaching the world about American values and how wonderful the United States are was a very important motivator of opening the country up to international students.
Yeah, I mean, one can also tackle these kind of arguments, questioning the basis of these arguments. That the fact that you say international mobility students mainly, that they cost money. There are also other calculations where it's well known, you know, that international students bring money. And then that is also about this optic stretching, you know. Of course, you only look at the tuition. Oh, yeah, the government has to do this. But imagine everything that goes around, right? Any economist, I'm not an economist, even I can say, you know, you follow the chain and you see what it means when students come in, and it's well known. The UK makes lots of money through international students coming to study. So I can imagine also pushing these kind of arguments. I mean, actually, we wrote a petition a long time ago. Some of you might have signed it. And not that we like to put this kind of utilitarian argument, but we also put it down because people say, hey, if you want to reach the parliament people, you have to speak those language. Moral doesn't matter. Don't put ethics and moral on top. And then we're like, okay, then we moved the arguments. And the first argument, I think one of the first was indeed, yeah, international students make money, yay. And of course, the companies have come up already, the international corporations. They're saying, actually, they are the loudest voice now. You know, these big companies now in Amsterdam or wherever, in Rotterdam, and say, look, if you keep doing this, we're going to move our headquarters somewhere else because we can't hire people. And there again, we should not separate. Oh, we're only talking about the student, you know. We're not saying that you cannot hire highly skilled people. But it's part of the same thing. We cannot now saying, yeah, then they can study somewhere else and come and work. No, people won't do that. And that is also, we have to sensitize people to think in a relational and connected way, systemic thinking. That is what is lacking. No? And a lot of these arguments is all like, oh, you would cut a piece of something, of a puzzle, and say, look, this is the problem. We get rid of that puzzle, but the whole thing will fall apart. Oh, I get very angry. So I better stop.
And start getting your questions ready and your comments, because I'm going to ask one more question of our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to you on the floor. So you've already started to signal your answer to my question. So this might be an easy question, but I also want to warn you that it's a troubled waters kind of question, because you'll piss people off depending on your answer. I surmise from both of your interventions in general and your answer to my last question that you believe that the agenda to try to take on the internationalized university, to rein it in or to put it on a leash or to roll it back, whatever the right metaphor may be, that it is motivated not by fundamental resource questions like, how are we going to deal with the finances of the university or the housing of the students or these kinds of issues, but instead about an agenda, about what it means to have an open society or a democratic open society, an internationalized and transnational society, a depatriarchized university, a place where indeed gender studies and sexuality issues are no longer so central to the university, or try to censor or send a signal to the universities that they should not be so uppity or so critical of what governments are doing, that there's an agenda afoot. So I surmise that, but I want to hear you describe for us how you see this politics of the constraints on internationalized education, how much you think it's about, in a sense, genuine good faith issues that involve resource questions that I think are important to take seriously. Good faith issues, for instance, about language and making sure that we do a good job servicing Dutch civil servants for tomorrow, which requires a certain modicum of Dutch language education. How much the reining in is about these kinds of good faith issues that we should take seriously, and how much it's about the more politicized attack on the open society and the open university. So let's go in reverse order this time. Let Maggie go, and then Annette, you get to finish us off.
Okay, I'll start with something a little bit, because I also am not completely well versed with all the numbers and whatever, but maybe I choose very biased news media to read. But also I get counter data to say, well, first of all, it is true that sometimes we present the picture as though Dutch students cannot learn Dutch anymore because of the English teaching, which is not true. Most bachelor programs in the country is still Dutch taught, right? That's what I've read. So I think sometimes this putting blame on something, and then I've also read, okay, Dutch students don't, or whoever wants to use Dutch are not so capable now. That is also not something that starts in the university education. No, it starts from the high school and start earlier. So it is often easy to push all these blames, right, onto people who come in. So in that sense, it is that kind of discrimination, exclusion that is so well practiced. And then we talk about, you didn't even say this, but there's a classic also, housing, no housing, everything's so expensive, can't find. Then why are, houses why is regulation not there? Why are no dormitories built? How come that, there are empty houses, people don't rent to students because they want to do it, to speculate, right? You have a very neoliberalized real estate market. All these are linked. And I think that is often the argument about if we don't let students come in, that will solve all problems. And that is always a bit naive, right? But it is very easy to convince some voters because it seems so easy. Oh, yeah, we have one button, we'll push it, everything will be okay. But it will not. But then the cost, the price to pay, the cost will be tremendous for some people. So, it is a democratic society. If we say, okay, some people, you just have to bear the cost and, and then at the end, problems are still not solved as long as you have a very neoliberal real estate market, as long as the high schools are not doing their job, and so on and so forth. And back to the very original argument that we need to get rid of these so that Dutch students can learn Dutch is just not valid. Those bachelor courses are there, and we are not talking about all universities are only using English, right? So that's also a fact, I think.
Yeah, I'll come back to that, but I want to unfold the problem into three elements. The first is the element of ignorance. So there are indeed people participating in arguing for the pushback against internationalization who simply don't seem to understand the value of internationalization very well. And this is the motivation for writing a book like that and trying to get in the media and explain it to them. Because if you have not experienced it for yourself and you don't have anyone in your close vicinity, family or friends who have experienced it, it's also difficult to know. You have to be taught. The second dimension is the quality of the discourse, and this is what Maggie was talking about. If I look at how this issue is being talked about in the Dutch media, it's just to pull your hair out. I mean, claims like they want to have all university teaching in English, or it's the students' fault, that international students' fault, that the housing prices in Amsterdam are what they are. It's just patent nonsense, but people get away with saying such things in the media and get very little pushback because there's very few people willing and able to argue against that and calling that for the nonsense it is. And part of that has to do with the third dimension, and that's actual political hostility to the project of international higher education. For the reasons we've mentioned, I've talked about how internationalization in higher education stands for openness and pluralism, and those are not the values highest on the agenda of the right. So international higher education is like a red flag for the political powers that be. And you can see that more or less obviously. You could see it super obviously in Hungary, where Orban just decided to kick out an entire university because it was too liberal for his taste. You could see that at the University of Oklahoma. That's one of the cases discussed in one of the chapters in the book, where the entire international studies program that was one of the most successful in the entire country was shut down because Republicans in the state legislature didn't want all that foreign stuff going on in Oklahoma. But maybe you can see it also in the Netherlands, and in particular with the focus on the Randstad elite universities with all their woke stuff going on, that we are, the main target of the pushback. So all three of those things play a role: the abysmal quality of public discourse in this country, ignorance and hostility.
Thank you both. Of course, at some point we're going to hear the answer that you want to give us, beyond, of course, the answer that's in the book, but also thinking about what the pushback should be against the reining in of the internationalized university. So that will be food for thought for both of you before we close. But let's now use our remaining time really to, and I'm assuming we have, am I right about the time that it's at 12 after? We have a little less than 20 minutes to round things up, is that right? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to try to do my best to keep the conversation focused. But let's give it back to the audience. So does anybody have a question or a comment that they want to share all the way in the back? And we may collect a few before we send it back to the panel.
Thank you. Hello. First of all, thank you so much for inspiring questions. Very insightful conversation. As a junior teacher, I facilitate seminars also at UvA at this program called Interdisciplinary Social Sciences, and I'm just looking for the class aspect in this, or maybe you could draw an argument how internationalization would also diversifies the university to make it less of an elitist place, which is practiced and experienced. I'm really fond of that conceptualization of place. So yeah, is my question
Clear? It's a
yeah?
good question.
Okay, thanks.
Let's take at least one more before we go back to the audience. So also right there.
Hi, thanks for the conversation so far. I've been reading a lot about global Trumpism at the moment and the rise of populism across the world. Would you be able to, on a multi-level politics level, be able to link this to the wider spread of, like, this pushback against internationalization? Would you class it as a fundamentally anti-globalization thought? And can we link the developments in the Netherlands to this similar sentiment in the US, in the UK, in places in the global south, like in India? Or do you think that this is a phenomenon that is not unique, but rises out of the unique structures within the Netherlands? Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Two big and good questions. And let me ask Annette and Maggie to chime in as best they can. You don't have to both say something, but let's get answers to these two questions.
Yeah. When it comes to the first question, the class issue, it's a really significant concern when it comes to international mobility, that of course it's pricey. And while maybe a lot of people would love to have an international student experience, not everyone can afford it. So that is a big issue. When it comes to the specifics of life in the Netherlands and at the UvA, of course you have the fact that within the European Union, we don't charge extra study fees, at least. So you have maybe the extra cost of living of being in one of the most expensive cities in Europe. But at least when it comes to the costs of studying, there's at least no class discrimination there. So you would expect migration from within Europe not to make the class aspect worse, at least. When it comes to people coming from outside the European Economic Area, of course, they have to pay more. And there I have been very upset for a very long time that we don't have more scholarships to offer. That's something that has to do with the way the Dutch higher education system is financed. But if you compare that, for example, to a country like the United States, where so many people get scholarships to come to study, and then you can actually break through or bridge a little bit of the class problem, because you might be able to get not only people who are not personally rich enough to afford to go study abroad without a scholarship, but you can also get people from much lower income countries to study in much higher income countries, which is another way of bridging class differences that's also important. So that's what I would say to that. And to the second question, the answer is actually a simple yes, because you asked, are there connections between these developments in different places around the globe, all of which seem to have some kind of anti-globalist backlash feel to them? And I think, yes, I think these are global interconnected developments. Maybe you'll say more about that.
Yeah, I'll start from the second one. Then of course, I also agree it's yes. But to your point about, is it anti-globalization or sort of like a undoing? I don't agree. I don't think so. It is about making globalization works for the top few percent even more. And there's blatant racism and sexism and anti-sexual diversity, all that, right? So, and it is linked, but I do think that these things play out differently. So your last question about, it's not a copy of the US, of course. Of course, in the Netherlands, we also have our own long history, long ways how whatever classism, racism, sexism work, right? So those are local specific specialties, but in general, yeah, I do see them very linked. And what's very scary for me now is a lot of these people inspire and each other, and call awful politics innovative and creative solutions, and that I find really, really scary. To your point about class dimension at the UvA or in higher education, yes, and it's still very elitist. I don't think internationalization is a solution. It's never, practiced as a solution for that. And I think to tackle classism, we need to do a lot also in the Dutch context. And internationalization will not solve that. And I do agree, yes, it takes capital and money and ability to move. Unfortunately, also underlying scholarship and all that is very hard to get. A bit nuanced though, class is not class. So, you know, an upper middle class in the Netherlands and upper middle class coming from, I don't know what I want to say now, Thailand, you know, it is different also, right? So I think if we think about intersectionally, even you say, oh, they're all upper middle class or all middle class kids, you know, in the same classroom. I think there is still a lot to learn from each other, what class means and how class does not travel and translate across borders just like that. And in my research, I've also heard and seen a lot, right, how a middle class in China, what that means and how that does not translate at all, you know, here, let's say, yeah.
This is a very good point, if I may. I like that last point. But I wanted to briefly come back to the anti-globalist issue, and I don't want to be really academic here by mincing words, but I think the distinction is important between anti-globalization and anti-globalist. In the book, we speak about a globalist ethos, which is the basic idea that we're in this together on this planet, and we want to learn together and develop together and cooperate. Globalization, if we look at what it practically means today, is above and beyond everything about the global flow of money and data. And of course, people who benefit from that are not about to get rid of globalization in that sense. On the contrary, so they are pro-globalization, anti-globalists.
Okay, thank you both. Very good. So there are I saw two other hands, so Daniel and Johan. So first, Daniel.
Sorry. Yeah, it's fine. Thank you for doing this book. Thank you for doing this talk. I agree with the sentiment completely. One thing that wasn't fully clear to me, and maybe you guys could both flesh it out. In the beginning, you talk about kind of like the 6 core aspects of this, and you talked about interacting with difference, and that is a thing in education itself, and as a thing for internationalization. And I think that difference is kind of core to your argument in general. Basically, it's important because that is what enables diversity, long story short. I think, and you guys started to touch on this already, a critic's perspective might be, okay, but what about the homogenization of language, i.e. Anglification, right? And indeed, right, not everything's becoming English, blah, 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 and I've profited a lot from English being in higher education because that's my native language. But there is a truth to that. A lot of science is in English. Now, I don't think that's a reason to get rid of the argument. That's a straw man argument. But what I'm trying to say is I think that you're talking about difference on a specific set of terms. Or at least this example that, okay, there is a degree of homogenization. It is not so international, just in this little bit, makes me think, okay, so difference on what terms for your internationalization? So basically, if we are talking about pluralities, right, and you guys have already brought up that there are different internationalizations, for your internationalization, what is the difference that makes a difference? Basically, I hope, is that clear?
If you could give it to Johan behind you.
Actually, my question is a bit related to this because I think in the discussion so far, internationalization is primarily equaled with Anglicization of the university. And I found it interesting, the parallel that Annette drew with the pre-Westphalian world, where you had as a lingua franca Latin. Now, of course, the difference with English is that Latin wasn't linked to a specific country or a specific part of the world where English is. And in that sense, I think, even though I agree with a lot of the arguments about plurality and etc., but the plurality is constrained, I think, by limiting to English, basically. And Helene can confirm this to me. We have this exchange network, which is very old at the UvA, about labor studies. But the idea behind the network was if you go to Portugal, and you have to learn Portuguese. If you go to France, you have to learn French. And then you really get to know the country. And it's eroding because most of our partners also start to organize programs in English. And actually they had quite sort of an interesting method to distribute the English language places, was that if a university was sending out students to non-English programs, they got extra credits to make claims on English programs. And so I think it's important, because part of the critique, I think, in the Netherlands, apart from all the racist, bigotist and whatever arguments, is about the use of language, actually, and the disconnection with the society. And however laudable the pre-Westphalian world of Latin was, it was a very elitist thing. I mean, if you say about open society, democracy, I mean, the Middle Ages weren't exactly the example of open society and democracy, I think. So I really would like you to think a little bit about not equating internationalization with using English and using English language literature.
We have time for one last question before I bring it back to the panelists. So behind you, yeah. And this will be the last question. So I'm hoping you're keeping track of your questions. I will referee them for you again if necessary.
Hello.
So please.
Hi. So Maggie, I have a question that is directed to you. Just with regards to you made reference to how I guess education can be internationalized via decolonization of education, I believe. Coming from South Africa, where I guess our political background and our higher education, we didn't really have that point of reference of learning from an African perspective. It was all Eurocentric, it was all European focused. So I can see the benefit of decolonization of higher education in South Africa, because it's beneficial for me as a South African. I'll be able to understand myself and my culture and the cultures of other Africans. However, from I guess from a European perspective, from a Netherlands, Amsterdam, Dutch-speaking, how would, I guess, decolonization of higher education be beneficial in an internationalized environment? Thank you.
Thanks. If you could bring that forward. So I think we only have a little bit of time left, so I want to ask both of you to reflect on. You can pick and choose of the different interventions you just heard. But Maggie, why don't you go first, and let's let Annette have the last word.
I will answer the question that directly addressed to me. I think it is actually even more important to decolonize the minds here. Exactly because people don't think that is an issue for them. Why do I care? It's your problem. You go decolonize your curriculum. No. The power hierarchy, the power imbalance is globally linked. And history-wise, think about how all that where they come from. In Europe, we have to actually do much more of that. And that is what we talk about, educating global citizens and think about. Yeah, I mean, definitely, it is, for me, a must. And it is about internationalizing education. Yeah, that is back to your point. Yeah, that we don't need mobilities. we also have to locally do this. And for me, indeed, internationalization is beyond these sending students here and there, but really fundamentally undo and unlearn some of the fundamentals. Why, certain knowledge, certain areas are seen as, we are okay, right? We don't need to make it ugly because it is all great here. It's just not all great here, right? And I think we need to face that. Unless we say morality doesn't matter, justice doesn't matter, history doesn't matter. And I hope that our university here still hold on to those principles. I definitely would do until I get kicked out or whatever, fired. And that I see as the responsibility for all of us. In our capacity, we do that. Of course, and I can't force people to do that, but I do think that is fundamental. Call it international, call it ethics, call it justice, right? So.
I'm grateful for the last questions because they allow me to make a point I really didn't want to forget to make. what is central to me is the encounter of difference, indeed, the possibility of encountering difference, because that is how we learn. But to encounter difference, you need to communicate with the other, and we need a language to communicate in. And that brings me to Johan's question. It used to be Latin. There is no country called Latin, but surely the Italians had an advantage in the day over the Danish, for example. And the same is true for English. Some countries have an advantage over others, but at least English is easy. And so I'm a pragmatist when it comes to that, I have to say. Maybe we can wish it were Esperanto, but that never really caught on. But now we are in the luxury situation, I would say. You can look at it that way, that so many people around the world are able to communicate in English. It would be a terrible waste if we decided to stop speaking English with each other. It would be like the Tower of Babel falling down. But that being said, even if we say English is a pragmatic choice and we need a lingua franca to communicate, the point I didn't want to forget to make is that the encounter of difference also, of course, has to take place in the locality in which it takes place. So it's an important part of international mobility to at least try and learn the language of the place where you are. So I am absolutely for the idea to encourage international students in the Netherlands to learn Dutch. Certainly if they're there not just for a 10-month, one-year master, but for a bachelor that keeps them in the country for at least 3 years. Because that is part of the encounter of difference and necessary to properly communicate with the people in the country where you find yourself as an international student. So the encounter of difference requires a lingua franca, but it also requires grounding ourselves in the place where we are. And that means in the Netherlands, being open and interested in learning Dutch. It's in fact not a good thing for our university to not have offered Dutch courses to our international students. When I spoke earlier about if you do internationalization, you have to do it right, that for me is part of it. If you want to attract international students, you should offer courses in the local language and offer them some, what's that called? Basic orientation in the country where they are and the culture in which they find themselves.
Can I say a little bit about in what language we work? I agree. I mean, I think actually it's the fortune that we can, so many people can speak English. It is the history, we can undo it, but it will be quite traumatic that we cannot go back to our holes, and then communicate with our clans for a long time before we can talk to each other. So there. And I also sometimes find this discussion individualized, like to the particular colleague, or particular student, whether you speak Dutch or Italian or Chinese. We, in the international higher education field, we work as a huge team. I talk, like the UFA in my department, I say, not to lose sight, of course, that we work as a collective. So we thrive because we have diversity. We thrive because we have different skills. So some of us are very good in Dutch and we have very good connection with the ministers. We do things here. Some of us are good in Brussels, speaking to the EU people. Some of us are, out there speaking a kind of Chinese because they need to push some rights issues over there. And I think that is exactly the beauty of an international staff and international student body, that we need to think in a collective term and not always reduce back to this, in how many months would you now speak Dutch? Because there are some people who are already be able to speak Dutch, So not to say that students should not learn, staff should not learn. Yes, people learn if it is useful. And I do agree that these, like having a course there, being proactive and saying, you can learn this is free and you can do this, and make sure that work and study pressure allows space for that learning as well. But don't forget that we are always, like a university thrive as a big institution, departments as a team, faculty as a team. And there we can then also learn to appreciate each other's strength a lot more.
I need to bring us to a close, I'm afraid. So thank you both for the answers to the questions. Thank you in the audience for those superb interventions and questions. It just remains for me to remind you that this is, after all, also a book launch. So I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to go out and buy in your bookstore or bol.com Universitas, Why Higher Education Must Be International. So buy that book, and on your way, think about and be grateful for the work of our panelists today. So Maggie Leung and, indeed, Annette Freiberg-Henan. And thank also to Spy 25 for giving us a forum for this meeting. And let's give a hand to our panelists.
There's an e-book as well.